Hi and welcome to day 5 of Moth Eaten Reel's 31 Days of Horror 2024. Today we come to you from a bleak and miserable film that I'm going to find difficult to talk about for a variety of reasons, but I do still rate it highly. I think that the quality is grand. Let's talk about Michael Haneke's Benny's Video from 1992. I wasn't sure what to expect going into this one apart from subtitles, and also I'd seen it referenced before alongside We Need to Talk About Kevin, a film that I started long ago once upon a time and then found it quite boring. But this review isn't about that, so it's okay. And oh gosh, we open into some edgelord footage. So as always, if you're watching these videos, I assume that you will never want to watch this film or that you have already watched it, and I didn't think that I would end up doing any warnings for 31 Days of Horror, it being just something that you would probably go into to look up the content warnings yourself, but forewarning, this scene is shown 4 times, technically, early on in the film. I wasn't particularly pleased with the opening. I thought, we're not going to have a no animals were harmed in the making of this film, because we're presented with some real abattoir-style footage of a pig being slaughtered on a farm with the bolt gun that is used in meat production. In the time when I was growing up, I feel like there were a few shows and clips and footage floating around and also on the TV with the aim of having people re-evaluate their relationship to eating meat. The footage is put in slow-mo and then we get the title credits, Benny's Video. This footage is then shown to actually be Benny's video, as it's intradiegetic footage where we zoom out into Benny's room, which is stock full of recording equipment, videos, cameras, a computer. He's a rich boy, and frankly, he's the 90s equivalent of an iPad baby. But we see that this is video that he recorded himself and is then sat controlling to put in slow-mo. We then go to a scene where we are then in another handheld camera showing, and it is a house party his sister's hosting because their parents are away. It gets in there early that their parents just are not around. His sister actually does not even live at home with them. She's got some pyramid scheme going on and she lives on her own, but she's come back to use her parents' house for this house party. And so we get in there instantly that he is neglected. I'm not joking when I say he's the 90s equivalent of an iPad baby. We see that he lives a very isolated life. He's often eating breakfast on his own. As I say, his sister doesn't actually live there, and so Benny pretty much has free reign of the house. We have a lot of meditative shots where I do really like the way that it's shot, where, as I say, we have this handheld camera footage where then it's obviously someone literally recording, but then all of the shots from the director are also at a static distance, as if they are also on then just a really high-tech handheld camera. The sound design, it's only ever ambient sound, you know, conversations, the kind of humming of electrics, the kind of humming you're getting in these videos. And so in these scenes where he's walking around his house on his own, eating the most disgusting looking toast, sorry Europe, I hate your breakfasts. But we also see that he frequents a video store, something that I had to have explained to me. So I hear that back in the day in video rental stores, they actually used to have little booths where you could sample the video that you were going to rent. And they're quite isolating little booths. It's something that then works in the film's favour to again show off that very individualist, shut-off, square eyes lifestyle. But in these long sequences exploring Benny's day-to-day, he then sees that there is a girl who frequently stands outside the video store. Interestingly, she looks through the window at the screens. One day he approaches her, they strike up a conversation, and he invites her around to his. They share stories of each other's lives. He gets a perspective on her and her brothers, and the fact that actually she has to take, I think it's a tram and a bus just to get into Vienna. She lives quite far out, and that immediately also classes her as someone who is way more impoverished than he is, with his fortress of DVDs and cameras and things that were probably very flippin' expensive at the time. As if they're not now. He invites her into his bedroom, and then he's obviously got all these cameras again, but one of them is a camera that is connected to a TV that shows that the camera is just facing out of his window. All the windows in his room are shuttered, and so he's just watching the street outside that he could see through the window, but he's watching it through a screen. He's got another camera set up in his room that shows them, and then he shows her the flippin' pig video. We get some background on this pig video, which is that he actually recorded it himself. That wasn't clear at the start. I think I said it, but it wasn't clear. It's here that he tells her that it's something that he recorded, and he shows that his parents are in the background because it's a farm that they go to on the weekends sometimes. And again, with his remote, he slows the footage down, and then she asks, like, have you ever seen a real dead body? Then we get to the, if you'll excuse the term, meat of the film, where he shows her that he still has the slaughter gun from the pig, and they mess around with it. They play chicken, scaredy cat, but when she says it to him, he shoots her with the slaughter gun for the pig. The way that it is shown to us, the audience, is then through this camera that he's set up to show the room and them in the room. It's horrible. I'm doing the summary, but this really took me back to my horrible 2009 days. If you know, you know. Shout out to all of us who were exposed to way too many videos that we should not have been exposed to, and then just casually went and sat down for dinner. Yeah. What a generation. Speaking of casually sitting down to dinner, his parents still aren't home. We have then another long sequence of showing that he's just been neglected. I don't know where his parents are. He doesn't know. He's used to this. He eats dinner. He cleans up the body a little bit. He goes to the club. He ends up sleeping around his friends. And I think something about that scene really then showed off how young they all are. I didn't end up mentioning this. It's not even necessarily implied just from the fact that he lives with his parents at all, but he's in high school and his friend is in high school and they exchange cigarettes, and when he sleeps around his friends, he's in a bunk bed, and I thought that it wasn't focused on a lot, but again, it really highlighted something about them being kids, you know? He gets himself a little buzz cut. The hairdresser says, I don't want to get in trouble from your parents for this, and he just says, like, don't worry, you won't hear from them. But his parents return, and his dad does grill him about his Auschwitz haircut. That is literally what he says. The subtitles said concentration camp haircut. However, even though I can't, like, fully understand German, I can still hear words, and the dad specifically said Auschwitz haircut. It's shown early on in the film that his parents tend to go to his room to then watch TV at all. And so he puts the news on, and then we're watching, again, a screen within a screen at this fixed angle, and then he just casually flicks through channels and then ends up showing them his snuff film on purpose. It's quite chilling how little they react. They're definitely reacting, but just not really in the way that the situation demands. They then have a skip scene where they're downstairs, they're around the table discussing the fact that he's killed a girl, and it's, again, very practical, very detached, it's so creepy, and his dad's like, well, does anyone know? And after he's done asking him these questions, Benny just goes, oh, I'm hungry, and so his mum goes off to make him food, and then once Benny's gone to bed, they're then discussing how to dispose of the body, because they basically say, well, we've got a couple of options here. One of them is that we're horrible, neglectful parents, and that he goes away in a psychiatric ward for the rest of his life. Ultimately, they decide that they're going to chop the body up into little pieces and flush it away. Then his mum takes him away to a holiday to Egypt for a week, I think they say in the film. It's a long sequence of events, and when they get home, they find no trace of the body. His dad has cleared it up entirely. And then we have a cut again to then the conversation that they had that night at the dinner table of them discussing chopping the body up into little pieces. And we then get this kind of sound bridge where Benny's taken this footage that he's recorded of this conversation to the police. And then the cops ask him, oh, why did you come to us with this? And he says, just because. And we close on a credits of police cameras around the station where it looks like his parents are being convicted, but not him. He just says, sorry, and goes, and the credits roll. And we don't get that no animals were harmed in the making of this film. I'm just going to keep saying it's a very difficult thing to talk about. I do really appreciate the style of the filming, but it really also made it almost difficult to concentrate. There really was then this great translation of the character's detachment, because I think that's then maybe a major word to use. Detachment, alienation, apathy. So obviously we open up on his whole fortress of videos, as I say, and the fact that he would literally rather experience life through a screen. Another thing that really hammered this home was the diegetic sound, the fact that pretty much everything you hear is within the world of the film. Even when music is used, it's something that carries over from a snippet of news or whatever show he's flicked through. There are a lot of sound bridges where then he's in a choir, that's a thing. And so that choir music is something that then translates through a couple of scenes and carries over. But as I say, the fact that all of the sound is diegetic, it is all happening around them, nothing is transposed over the top. It really helps create that uncomfortable, raw atmosphere that feels just eerily authentic. It helps too that the actors are unknown. It's something that I think we've already covered in one of the days of horror this month, is that sometimes when you know an actor, it gives you preconceptions. And for this kind of thing especially, where we're really focusing in on that authentic, genuine, found footage almost thing, you don't want to recognize any of these people. So I looked it up, and they pretty much are unknowns, except for the lead actor, because he is in another film of the director's. The fact that this is also frequently intercut with newsreels is also something that really works to kind of drive home that horrible detachment feeling that also kind of points a finger at the audience. It's something that is still very relevant to now. It's a trend that hasn't gone away, and arguably, how can you make it go away? The actual real footage of human tragedy, as shown on the news, is still covered in logos, little ditties, jingles, and that there is like a banal evil to turning human tragedy into decontextualized snippets. And I think that every time this film is using that, it is then a thing that is to say to the audience, like, don't you feel accountable? And I don't know how I feel about that now. So I feel like now there's a lot of irony just in media in general. It's kind of become a bit of a default, you know, that thing that I find so annoying, that annoying little wink to the camera, let's break the fourth wall, let's acknowledge how hopeless everything is, but then kind of round it off with a perky little, but we'll watch TV anyway, you know? This film at least definitely cannot be said to be making light of that the way that I see it in a lot of modern media now. I feel like these days if you see it, it is then trying to get you on board, you know, a jokey little, oh, we regret it too, oh, we're also sick of this, we know you're sick of it too, wink, buy more of our stuff. And this film has then just this hatred of that consumerism. What else is there? There's also a lot of scenes of McDonald's, the video rental store, and when they're in Egypt, I think it's both times that they kind of have this zoomed out view of the TV, that there are two branded products next to the TV. It's something that I've seen in a few bits of media from the 90s. Number one, Daria. Because the early seasons were good before, you know, she got too self-absorbed, apathetic, and also turned into a little homewrecker. But from not really being alive in the 90s, I think that these kinds of shows are the main place that I get that perspective of a real confusion, alienation, sense that everyone was feeling like they were lacking agency and going nowhere, seeing the things that they were promised, living in almost a really like nice era. End of the Cold War, pre 9/11, and then also just this time of then a lot of American cultural dominance coming into other countries. Like, this is why it's a little bit difficult for me to talk about as well as a film, because from my perspective, I don't know what was happening in Austria. I can only assume. And the way that the film paints it and what I saw in front of me, you know? As I say, this film does seem to then definitely like make that kind of hatred of consumerism front and center. There's a lot of scenes of the kids that require exchanging money for drugs, and the fact that they focus so much on the hands with this kind of panning camera, which then, as I say, stands out because a lot of the shots are very static, as if it was just propped up on a tripod and then you just watch things move in front of you. You are then just this static viewer of events. The almost invasiveness of brands in the casual scenes that we're shown really do stand out in the general set in a style that, as I say, like, I really do admire how it's done, even though I struggle to think how I feel about it overall, because it really was a chilling, uncomfortable experience. Good grief, not an uncomfortable horror movie. But it really is just that brand of 90s nihilism, I suppose, that I've got to say again, I've only experienced through then kind of it being explained to me in retrospect. Things like, obviously, Nirvana's music, the whole kind of grunge movement, and a big sense from young people of just this alienation and irony, sarcasm, and what's the pointism. Something that we still very much feel today, but as I say, it's definitely then a different style of it when it's then being regurgitated back at us by the entertainment that we seek out. Like, the funny thing is, looking back on things like Daria, it felt in a way less afraid to just get to the point of the things that were making people feel so bad. Now it's like, it still has to be marketable. That sense of being marketable is just absolutely everywhere. There's that flipping quote from Disco Elysium about how capitalism just subsumes all criticisms into itself. But we're not talking Disco Elysium, we're talking Benny's video. One of the conclusions I came out of the film with might be shocking, but I felt bad for Benny. Somehow I did. Like, he's a rotten little so-and-so. He flippin' murdered a girl with a slaughter gun for animals by shooting her 3 times as she screamed on the floor, and also ratted his parents out with just no sympathy on his face, and the entire holiday doesn't seem to understand why his mum burst into tears at some point. But I said it earlier, he's like the 90s equivalent of an iPad baby. It says a lot that his parents, with all their money living in Vienna, would rather than just fill his room with screens than actually talk to him, address anything with him. There's a few scenes where they're sat down for dinner together, they don't talk, it's quite pointed that all of their meal times are silent. As then a bit of a negative and something that I'm aware of, do you remember when video games caused violence? I think they still do in a lot of countries. Hi Australia. And something that this movie then maybe doesn't actually kind of get across is that it's not the screens that cause violence. It was obviously a huge thing in a fair few countries, Britain included. Hello Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, where then this idea that a bunch of media on screens was then causing violence amongst youths. And not that this was this film's, like, assignment, but I don't think I look kindly on how this film almost kind of says, yeah, it is part of the desensitization. It's why kids don't care about their actions. It's obviously a complicated topic, but I feel like there are merits to discussing it, because using the iPad baby example again, it then all really seems to come down to parental neglect. Of course it's going to happen that if you don't actually parent your child, that then there is going to be that detachment there. It's not to do with the screens, it's to do with neglectful parenting. This neglectful parenting is then shown from two sides of the class divide. With the girl that he slaughters, the girl who's never named, by the way. When she goes into his room and he puts the pig slaughter video on, there is then the comparison visually of when it cuts to her face and it cuts to the slaughtered pig. You feel the dread at that moment. But I realised thinking about it earlier that, like the pig, the girl, neither of them are named, they're just nouns. And the way Benny plays that footage on repeat and does the slow-mo, I think it kind of indicates, of course in the opening scene, but when he does it again, the dread that builds is the way that then with his remote, he's then exerting some kind of control over time. When he slows it down within that moment where the pig is between life and death, having that control and the fact that that is authentic violence. In a conversation the two of them have together when she asks, have you ever seen a dead body? He mentions how in movies it's all plastic and ketchup. So it is very much on his mind that he wants this authentic violence. He's actually at this point already exerted control over the girl. By inviting her into his home, and also they have some game of charades. I forget the build up to it, but when she's sat down because they've been eating pizza together, he approaches her and's like, what am I? And she's like, what? And he's like on his hands and knees, like crawling up to her. It's quite creepy. But he's like, I'm a dog on a metro. And he grabs her, puts her in some kind of arm lock, and then says, I'm police on the metro. And so uses that physical bodily dominance in that moment. It's something that immediately sends alarm bells that he would kind of test out his ability to exert control over her in that way. But I think that then having that before the animal video as well, it is part of building up that dread, and then also the sense that she's not got the support that he has, even with his parents not there. He's then got a whole house to himself. She does not seem to have that. And it's tragic that actually, when he goes through her school bag after he's killed her, one of the only photos she has is of a cat. It's a picture of her holding a cat, and her face isn't part of the picture. The cat is central in the picture. And I think that the director then is maybe using that as kind of a thing to highlight the difference in empathy levels. I'd say the film kind of presents his lack of empathy towards animals as then part of the wider issue. There is then something to be said about how then she, in her class, has then that wider empathy, but he others her the same way that he treats the pig. Bringing up Daria again just because I have a real lack of pop culture references to kind of get across my general knowledge of the vibes of the 90s nihilism. The thing about Daria is that for the first few seasons, definitely, she had values. I think Benny's video then presents something that shows what happens when you're desensitized with a lack of values. He just does not seem to care about anything. That final scene where he shows the cops the recording of his parents planning to chop the body into tiny pieces, and police say, like, why you come to us now? Just because. There is a scene when he gets back from Egypt where his dad goes to visit him and asks him, like, about what it was like to kill, I think. And he's like, very, again, just, oh, well, I just did it. Like, a lot of his answers to these questions of why are just very, just because. Not even an I don't know. Like, there's no real deeper thought in there. There is just an impulsiveness that just has no attachment to any values or belief system. He just does things because he can, because he has that privilege. We even see this disregard for his friend. The friend whose house he stays around, he at some point is in class with him and he just knocks him off the chair because he annoyed him a little bit. Knocked him forcefully enough that then the teacher overseeing the class at the time says, like, get out, I'm gonna have to go call one of your parents. Penny brings this up, by the way, during the conversation of what are we gonna do with this body? He just casually drops, oh yeah, Mr. So-and-so says that he needs to see one of you, Mum or Dad. It's chilling, he just does not care. And because of how the entire film frames it, it's not in any general, like, medical condition, doesn't care, just completely adrift in a city with just no attachment. I think there is something to be said about the setting of a city as well, and how that also is used to drive home this sad, detached, alienated existence. It is fantastic that pretty much every scene they manage to find a way to have a fixed camera angle to feel just very voyeuristic, like here's some CCTV, here's a traffic cam, and one of the things they do later on in the film, I think before they go to Egypt, they have the buffer between pictures of the city and videos of the cars driving by and all of these particularly blocky buildings that just make the cars feel just so tiny and so desolate. I'm a country bumpkin. I always feel that feeling in cities where immediately I feel like the loneliest person in a crowded room. It gets to me very quickly. City slickers do not interact. The city then, of course, is also a great place to then also get that consumerism criticism in there. The fact that it is a lot of branded places, a lot of shop fronts that are still around today, and that have people just in this position where there's not really as much small talk, people don't really talk to each other, people are just so busy, and individualism is thriving, you know? It's reflected in his own sister's callousness with her business, and the way that she just uses her parents' house. And early on as well, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, when their parents return to the house and find that she's hosted this house party, they also don't care. There is just so much uncaring, unfeeling, going through the motions, because he just says to her something along the lines of, oh, well, yeah, you know I'd let you, like, you should have asked, but, because you know I'd let you. You should have asked. I think it's a really good establishing early scene for kind of just showing the position they're in society, where they have that entitlement, where, why ask? You know, is that saying better to beg forgiveness than ask permission? They're not in a position where they ever have to beg forgiveness. He literally murders someone, and his parents just sit there, talk about it all in terms of practicality, and that, yeah, well, what's the alternative? We get called neglectful parents, and he gets locked up in a psych ward. It's just a major part of how chilling the entire film is, that... Not to be dramatic, but I feel like a lot of us know a family like that, on either end of the scale, where it's just... It's not nice, like, oh, we'll forgive you for anything. It's not supportive. It's not a network. It's just... whatever. I think it helps that he's a child, that I do just see Benny as a victim. He eats his sad little European breakfast every morning, he spills some milk, and it's just sad. It's just so bleak and miserable to watch. I'm mostly memeing when I keep going on about European breakfasts, but I do feel that then it's another thing that's important to the film, that there's a lot of footage of him just eating things like toast and yogurts and microwave pizza. It's all food that he can make on his own. He reminds me of little Matilda. But it's not cute, it's sad, because that's what he's been left alone with. I mentioned how there's a couple of scenes with McDonald's specifically, and that really then does weave it together as that fast food consumerism, and then again how it connects to the news snippets that get shown. Just lots of bits. It draws attention as well to the specifics of how his dad says that they're going to get rid of the body, chop her up into tiny pieces enough to flush her down the pipes. He specifically says something along the lines of, we've got to make sure the chunks aren't too big that they'll clog the pipes. And it really again has that allegory attached of how we consume things. Food, people, and the news. Human tragedy broken down into bite-sized bits. Yeah, to wrap it up, a lot to chew on actually, but very miserable and bleak. The kind of thing that I really appreciate, a lot of the intent, the art, the direction, the acting, but I tend to starve things on my general enjoyment, and that's why this has an undeserving 3 blank videotapes. I've got to hammer home that I really appreciated the film, you know. I recommend it to those who have a strong stomach for this kind of thing, but due to its bleakness, it's not a film that's fun to watch. Tomorrow we'll be turning back to the 80s, an obviously far less bleak time, for a mystery thriller horror. I'll see you then.